How the chosen follow. Jesus steps in times of difficulties. Suffering is something no one wants to face. But what if the very thing you're trying to avoid is actually a mark of being chosen by God? What if the trials in your life are not proof that God has abandoned you, but rather confirmation that you are walking the same path Jesus walked? People often believe that following Christ should lead to a life of ease, where blessings flow without interruption and faith shields them from hardship. But the truth is far more powerful than that. The chosen are not called to a life free of struggle. They are called to overcome. Jesus did not promise an easy road. He promised that in this world there would be trials. He assured his followers that suffering would come not as a punishment, but as a sign that they belonged to him. Every great man and woman of faith, from the prophets to the apostles, walked through fire before stepping into their divine calling. You are no different. If you have ever felt overwhelmed by trials, if you have ever questioned why your faith seems to invite more opposition instead of less, you are in the right place. Because in this video, you are going to see that difficulties are not a sign of God's absence. They are a sign that He is molding you, shaping you, and preparing you for something greater. You will discover the truth that most people miss: why suffering is a necessary part of the journey of the chosen. You will understand how Jesus walked through his darkest moments and how you can follow in his footsteps with confidence. And most importantly, you will see that in every hardship, there is a greater purpose waiting to be revealed. By the end of this, you will no longer see suffering as an obstacle, but as evidence that you are on the right path. You will recognize that trials are not designed to break you, but to transform you. And you will walk away knowing exactly what it means to be one of the chosen, standing firm in faith, no matter what comes your way. The path of the chosen is not easy, but it is worth it. And if you are watching this, it means God has something to say to you. The hidden truth about suffering. Most people see suffering as a sign that something is wrong. They believe pain means they have taken a wrong turn, made a mistake, or are being punished. But what if suffering is not a sign of failure, but of purpose? What if the very trials you are facing are the evidence that you are chosen? The world teaches that comfort equals success, that ease is proof of blessing, and that struggle is to be avoided at all costs. But the kingdom of God operates on a different principle. Those who are called, those who are truly set apart for something greater, will go through trials, not because God is distant, but because He is near, shaping them, molding them, and preparing them for something far beyond what they can see. Look at the lives of the greatest men and women of faith in the Bible. None of them walked an easy road. Abraham, called the father of faith, waited decades for a promise that seemed impossible. Moses endured rejection and exile before leading a nation. Joseph was betrayed by his own brothers, sold into slavery, and imprisoned for years before stepping into his divine appointment. David, anointed as king in his youth, spent years running for his life, hiding in caves, and living as an outcast before ever stepping onto the throne. And Jesus himself, the Son of God, walked a path filled with rejection, suffering, and ultimately, the cross. If even the Son of God was not spared from suffering, why do so many think that following him should be without pain? Suffering is not an interruption to the plan of God. It is often the very tool he uses to accomplish it. Every great calling comes with great opposition. The enemy does not waste his time attacking those who pose no threat to the kingdom. The fiercest battles come to those who have the greatest purpose. The trials you are facing are not proof that you are forgotten. They are proof that you are being prepared. The enemy would not fight so hard against you if he were not terrified of what God is about to do through you. The chosen are refined through trials, not destroyed by them. The fire does not come to burn them down, but to remove everything that does not belong: pride, doubt, fear, reliance on human strength. What remains after the fire is something purer, stronger, and unshakable. This is why suffering is never wasted in the life of a believer. It serves a purpose far greater than the pain itself. God allows suffering not because He enjoys watching His children struggle, but because He knows what it produces. He sees what you cannot. He knows that endurance leads to strength, that pain produces perseverance, and that the very trials meant to break you are the ones shaping you into the person you were created to be. What if the thing you are praying for God to take away is the very thing He is using to answer your prayer? What if the hardship you are walking through right now is the tool He is using to strengthen your faith, to build your character, and to take you to a level of spiritual maturity you never thought possible? This is the hidden truth most people miss. Suffering is not the enemy. It is the tool God uses to make you more like Christ. And the more you resist it, the longer you delay the transformation He is trying to bring into your life. The refining fire does not come to destroy you, but to prepare you. Every great purpose is preceded by great preparation, and preparation is never easy. The path of the chosen is marked by difficulty because they are being prepared for something that ordinary people cannot handle. The weight of their calling requires endurance, and endurance is only built through trials. The enemy does not attack those who have no calling. The storm does not come for the person sitting still. It comes for the one who is moving forward, stepping into their destiny. The greater the attack, the greater the calling. The harder the opposition, the greater the impact you are meant to have. If you have been facing trial after trial, if you have felt like the battle never seems to end, you need to hear this. You are not being abandoned. You are being prepared. The very thing you think is breaking you is actually the thing that is making you. And when you come out of this, you will not be the same. You will be stronger, wiser, and more aligned with God's purpose for your life than ever before. God does not waste pain. He does not allow suffering without a purpose. He is not absent in your struggle. He is working in the middle of it. He is using what the enemy meant for evil and turning it for good. But in order to see that, you have to shift your perspective. You have to stop seeing suffering as an obstacle and start seeing it as an opportunity. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" start asking, "What is God trying to teach me?" Instead of praying for the trial to end, start praying for the strength to endure it. Instead of fearing the fire, trust the one who is walking with you through it. This is why suffering is not to be feared, but embraced. Because for those who are truly chosen, suffering is not the end of the story. It is just the beginning of something greater. What you are facing now is not permanent. The pain is temporary, but the transformation is eternal. When God allows suffering, He is never being cruel. He is being intentional. He is strengthening you in ways you cannot see yet, but one day you will look back and realize that every tear, every trial, and every moment of struggle was worth it. Because through it all, He was making you into exactly who He created you to be. Jesus' path was never easy. Many admire Jesus for His wisdom, His miracles, and His compassion, but few are willing to walk the road He walked. The modern mindset seeks comfort, but Jesus never promised comfort. He promised a cross. The truth is, following Jesus is not about escaping hardship. It is about embracing the same path He walked, the path of obedience, sacrifice, and endurance through suffering. From the moment He stepped into public ministry, Jesus was met with opposition. The same people who marveled at His words later turned their backs on Him. The crowds that shouted Hosanna one day were the same ones who screamed, "Crucify Him," not long after. He was falsely accused, mocked, beaten, and rejected, but He never wavered. He did not allow betrayal to stop Him. He did not let suffering make Him abandon His mission. He endured not because it was easy, but because he was fully committed to the will of the Father. The idea that suffering is a sign of divine disfavor is completely dismantled when we look at Jesus' life. He was sinless, perfect in obedience, yet he suffered more than anyone else in history. He was rejected, ridiculed, and tortured, not because he did anything wrong, but because he was fulfilling his purpose. If suffering came to Jesus, how much more will it come to those who follow him? Many assume that when life becomes difficult, God has turned away from them. But look at Jesus. His suffering did not mean he was out of God's will. It meant he was exactly where he was supposed to be. His pain was not proof of God's absence. It was the very plan of redemption unfolding. What he endured was necessary for the salvation of mankind. And the struggles you face may very well be necessary for what God is preparing in your life. Jesus knew what awaited him. He knew the cross was coming. He knew the betrayal would come from one of his closest disciples. He knew the weight of the world's sin would be placed upon him. And yet he walked forward without hesitation. He did not pray for an escape. He prayed for strength to endure. In the Garden of Gethsemane, knowing the suffering ahead, he cried out to the Father, "If it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will." That was the defining moment. He did not choose the easy road. He chose obedience. This is what separates those who are truly chosen. Many want to follow Jesus when the road is easy, when the miracles are flowing, when the blessings are abundant. But the real test comes when the path leads to suffering. Will you keep walking? Will you trust the Father even when you cannot see what he is doing? Will you endure even when everything in you wants to give up? Jesus did not just suffer physically. He endured emotional pain, relational pain, and spiritual agony. He felt the weight of loneliness when his closest friends abandoned him. He felt the sting of betrayal when Judas sold him for silver. He felt the crushing sorrow of carrying the sins of the world. And yet, he never let pain dictate his obedience. He stayed faithful even when it hurt. Too many people assume that if something is hard, it must not be God's will. But Jesus' path shows the opposite. The road of the chosen is not smooth. It is not free from suffering, but it is filled with purpose. If Jesus had chosen the easy way, there would be no salvation, no redemption, no victory over sin and death. But because he endured, everything changed. And this is the lesson for those who follow him. The easy road is never the one that leads to transformation. If Jesus, the Son of God, had to suffer, then those who belong to him must also be willing to endure hardship. He made it clear when he said, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me." The cross is not comfortable. The cross is not convenient, but it is the only way to resurrection. Following Jesus is not about chasing blessings. It is about staying faithful even in the fire. It is about trusting that the suffering you endure is not in vain. It is about knowing that just as the cross was not the end for Jesus, your trials are not the end for you. They are shaping you, refining you, and preparing you for something greater. The path Jesus walked was never easy, but it was victorious. He overcame not by avoiding suffering, but by walking through it with unwavering faith. And if you are truly chosen, your journey will mirror his, not because God delights in your pain, but because he knows that on the other side of your endurance is a glory that far outweighs the temporary suffering you now face, the refining fire of the chosen. Fire has the power to destroy, but it also has the power to refine. It can consume what is weak, but it can also strengthen what is pure. This is why those who are truly chosen by God must pass through fire. Not because God enjoys watching them suffer, but because he is refining them, shaping them, and removing everything that does not belong. Gold is not found in its purest form. It is extracted from the earth, covered in impurities, mixed with other elements that weaken its value. It must be placed in extreme heat, melted down, and purified until everything that is not gold is separated and burned away. Only then does it reach its highest worth. The same is true for those who are called by God. They are not placed in the fire to be destroyed. They are placed in the fire to be refined. The chosen cannot carry excess baggage. They cannot move forward with the weight of pride, fear, doubt, or self-reliance. So, God allows trials, not to punish, but to purify. He strips away what is unnecessary. He burns away what is holding them back. He takes them through seasons of testing, not because he has abandoned them, but because he is preparing them. The refining process is painful, but it is necessary. Without it, the chosen would remain ordinary. With it, they become unstoppable. Look at the lives of those who walked in great purpose. None of them were exempt from the refining fire. Moses spent 40 years in the wilderness before leading Israel. Joseph was thrown into a pit, sold into slavery, and imprisoned before stepping into his destiny. David was anointed as king, but spent years as a fugitive before he ever sat on the throne. Every great calling comes with a great refining. Jesus himself was tested in every way. Though he was sinless, he still walked through trials. He fasted for 40 days in the wilderness, being tempted by the enemy. He endured rejection from his own people. He suffered betrayal from those closest to him. He faced humiliation, pain, and ultimately the cross. If Jesus was refined through suffering, how much more must those who follow him be refined? The process is not meant to be easy. It is meant to be effective. When you are in the fire, it feels like everything is falling apart. It feels like you are being broken down, stripped away, left with nothing. But in reality, what is happening is transformation. You are being prepared for something greater. You are being molded into who you were always meant to be. The impurities in your character, the doubts, the fears, the things that would hold you back, God is using the fire to burn them away. Many people resist the process. They want the blessing without the refining. They want the calling without the preparation. But God will never place someone in a position they are not ready to handle. He will never give a great calling to someone who cannot bear the weight of it. This is why the refining fire is necessary. It is not just about removing weakness. It is about making the chosen strong enough to carry the anointing he has for them. The greatest mistake someone can make is to run from the fire. Those who resist the refining process remain stagnant. They never step into their full potential because they refuse to endure the process required to reach it. But those who embrace it, those who surrender to God even when it hurts, those who trust him in the middle of the fire, those are the ones who come out as pure gold. There is a reason why the enemy fights those who are going through the fire. He knows that if they endure, they will be unstoppable. If they do not break under pressure, they will rise stronger. If they refuse to give up, they will walk in a power that terrifies hell itself. This is why the refining process is so intense. It is not just about personal growth. It is about spiritual authority. Those who have been through the fire and remained faithful carry an anointing that cannot be shaken. If you feel like you are being tested, if you feel like everything is being stripped away, if you feel like you are walking through fire, know this: you are not being destroyed. You are being refined. You are being prepared for something greater. You are being made into someone who can carry the calling God has placed on your life. When the fire has done its work, you will not be the same. You will not be weak. You will not be uncertain. You will not be burdened by the things that once held you back. You will walk in confidence, in purpose, and in power. You will be like gold, refined, purified, and ready for the destiny God has prepared for you. Why the enemy attacks those with purpose. The enemy does not waste his energy on those who pose no threat. He does not fight against those who are stagnant, those who are content with living in spiritual mediocrity, or those who are disconnected from their divine calling. The enemy is strategic, and he reserves his fiercest attacks for those who are chosen, those who carry a divine purpose, and those who have the potential to bring great destruction to the kingdom of darkness. The very fact that you are facing opposition is proof that you are called. The enemy does not fight those who are already on his side. He fights those who are stepping into their God-given destiny. If you have been facing battles that seem relentless, if it feels like every time you take a step forward, something comes to knock you back, understand this. It is not because you are failing. It is because you are a threat. Look at the life of Jesus. From the moment he was born, he was hunted. Herod sent soldiers to kill every male child in Bethlehem just to try to eliminate him before he even began his ministry. The enemy recognized who he was before most people did. The attacks did not start when Jesus began performing miracles. They started when he was just an infant, before he had even spoken a word or done anything significant. That alone should tell you something. The enemy attacks not based on where you are, but based on where you are going. This is why many of the chosen face adversity before they even step into their purpose. Before they ever see the fulfillment of their calling, they experience resistance, rejection, and hardship. The battle often begins long before the victory is in sight. The enemy does not wait for you to become powerful before he starts attacking. He tries to stop you before you even realize how powerful you are. The same was true for Moses. Before he ever led Israel out of Egypt, there was an attempt on his life. Pharaoh ordered all Hebrew baby boys to be killed, trying to eliminate the very person God had chosen to be a deliverer. Moses survived, but the attack was proof of his calling. The enemy saw what he was destined to become, and he tried to stop it before it ever began. This pattern is seen all throughout Scripture. The greater the calling, the greater the attack. Joseph had dreams of greatness, and before they were fulfilled, he was thrown into a pit, sold into slavery, and wrongfully imprisoned. David was anointed as king, yet he spent years running for his life, facing battles before he ever sat on the throne. Paul carried the gospel across nations, and with every step forward, he faced persecution, imprisonment, beatings, and shipwrecks. If you are under attack, it is because you carry something valuable. The enemy does not fight for things that are worthless. He fights for what he fears, and he fears those who are anointed. This is why the battle has been so intense. This is why the warfare has been relentless. It is not random, and it is not meaningless. The enemy is trying to discourage you, to exhaust you, to make you give up before you step into what God has for you. But here is the truth he does not want you to realize. His attacks are only confirmation of your purpose. Every hardship you face, every obstacle in your path, every trial sent to break you, it is all evidence that you are carrying something powerful. If you were not a threat, he would leave you alone. But because you are called, because you have a divine assignment, he will do everything he can to make you doubt, to make you weary, and to make you stop moving forward. This is why you cannot give up. The battle is proof that you are close to something significant. The enemy does not fight for what he has already won. He fights to stop what is about to be released. If you could see what is on the other side of this battle, you would understand why the fight has been so intense. The enemy is afraid of what will happen when you finally step into your full calling. He is terrified of what will be unleashed when you refuse to quit. You were never meant to live a life free of challenges. You were meant to overcome them. The attacks will come, but they do not have the power to stop you unless you let them. The enemy is not in control of your destiny. God is. And no matter how many times the enemy tries to block your path, God's plan will prevail. The chosen are not exempt from battles. They are strengthened by them. Every attack the enemy sends is not a sign of defeat. It is an opportunity for greater victory. You were not meant to fall, you were meant to rise, and when you do, the very thing that was meant to destroy you will become the testimony that fuels your purpose. How faith is truly measured in storms. Faith is easy when everything is going well. It is simple to trust God when prayers are answered quickly, when doors open effortlessly, and when life feels secure. But true faith is not tested in seasons of abundance. It is revealed in the middle of the storm, when everything around you is shaking, when nothing makes sense, and when you are left with only one choice: trust God or surrender to fear. The true measure of faith is not in how loud you praise God when blessings are pouring in, but in how firmly you stand when the storm is raging. Anyone can believe when life is smooth, but only those who are truly chosen will hold on to their faith when everything seems to be falling apart. This is why storms come, not to destroy, but to reveal. Look at the disciples on the boat with Jesus. They had seen him perform miracles. They had watched him heal the sick, cast out demons, and teach with divine authority. Yet when the storm came, they panicked. They allowed the wind and the waves to shake their faith. In their fear, they cried out, "Master, don't you care if we drown?" They mistook his silence for his absence. They forgot that the one who commanded the storm to come was also the one who had the power to calm it. This is what happens in the lives of many believers. When the storm begins, fear takes over, doubt creeps in. The enemy whispers lies. God has forgotten you. He doesn't hear your prayers. He won't come through this time. And many fall for the deception, not realizing that storms are not sent to break them, but to build them. Faith that cannot endure pressure is not faith at all. The chosen do not waver when the storm comes, because they understand one unshakable truth: God is in control even when he is silent. Jesus did not calm the storm immediately because he wanted to test the faith of his disciples. He wanted to see if they would trust him even when they could not see him working. And the same is true for you. God's delay does not mean his denial. His silence does not mean his absence. The question is, will you trust him even when you cannot feel him? The enemy will always use storms to attack faith. He knows that if he can shake your confidence in God, he can weaken your ability to move forward. He wants you to focus on the size of the waves rather than the power of the one who walks on water. He wants you to magnify the problem instead of magnifying God's promises. But the chosen do not live by sight. They live by faith. Abraham was called the father of faith, not because his life was easy, but because he believed even when everything in the natural told him otherwise. He waited decades for a promise that seemed impossible. Sarah's womb was barren and time was against them. But Abraham did not let circumstances define his faith. He did not waver when it seemed like God was taking too long. He believed, and that belief was counted as righteousness. Job lost everything: his family, his wealth, his health, yet he refused to curse God. He did not understand why suffering had come upon him, but he remained steadfast. In the end, God restored everything Job had lost, proving that storms are not the end of the story. They are simply the place where faith is tested and strengthened. Faith is not about understanding every detail of God's plan. It is about trusting that he has a plan even when you do not see it. If you are in a storm right now, if everything in your life feels uncertain, if fear is trying to creep in, this is your moment to prove what you truly believe. Will you allow the storm to shake your faith, or will you anchor yourself in the truth that God is still in control? Many people pray for great faith, but they do not realize that faith only grows in adversity. It does not develop in comfort. It is forged in difficulty, in trials, in the moments when all logic says to give up, but your spirit tells you to hold on. If you want unshakable faith, you must be willing to endure the storms that come to test it. The chosen do not fear the storm. They understand that storms are temporary, but faith is eternal. They do not question God's goodness just because the wind is strong. They know that no storm lasts forever, and that on the other side of the storm is a greater revelation of who God is. Storms will come, trials will test you, but if your faith is anchored in God, you will not be moved. You will stand firm, not because the circumstances are easy, but because your trust is in the one who controls the wind and the waves. And when the storm passes, your faith will not just survive, it will be stronger than ever before. The power of endurance in the midst of pain. Pain has a way of revealing what is truly inside a person. It strips away every pretense, every false sense of control, and every illusion of strength. It forces a decision to either give up or keep pressing forward. And for those who are chosen, endurance is not an option, it is a necessity. Endurance is what separates those who merely believe from those who truly walk in faith. It is not about how strong you are when life is easy. It is about how unshakable you remain when everything around you is collapsing. True endurance does not come from human willpower. It comes from an unrelenting trust in God, a refusal to let suffering dictate your faith, and a deep conviction that pain is never wasted in the hands of the Father. Jesus displayed this kind of endurance from the beginning. He knew what awaited him, the suffering, the rejection, the betrayal, the cross. At any moment, he could have walked away. He could have chosen the easy road, but he endured because he knew that pain was not the end of the story. His endurance was fueled by his understanding of the greater purpose, and this is what the chosen must grasp. Pain is not meant to destroy you. It is meant to strengthen you for what is ahead. Look at the lives of those God used mightily. Joseph endured years of injustice, slavery, and imprisonment before stepping into his destiny. Moses endured the wilderness before leading a nation. Paul endured beatings, persecution, and imprisonment, yet he wrote letters from a prison cell that still impact the world today. None of them were exempt from suffering. What made them different was their endurance. Endurance is not just about surviving, it is about growing. It is about pressing forward even when every part of you wants to quit. It is about trusting that the fire is refining you, not consuming you. Many people start their journey with passion, but when difficulties arise, they falter. They question if they heard God correctly, if they are on the right path, if they should just give up. But those who are truly chosen do not base their obedience on comfort. They keep moving forward, even when the road is painful. The enemy knows that endurance is dangerous. A believer who refuses to give up is a believer who becomes unstoppable. This is why he uses trials to try to wear you down. He knows that if he can exhaust you, discourage you, and make you question God's faithfulness, he can keep you from fulfilling your calling. But what he does not realize is that for those who are truly chosen, trials do not weaken faith. They strengthen it. Every time you endure, your spirit grows stronger. Every time you refuse to give up, your faith deepens. Every time you press forward in pain, you become more dangerous to the enemy's kingdom. This is why God allows endurance to be built through hardship, because the level of faith you need for your calling requires a level of strength that can only be developed through trials. There is a reason why some people never step into their full purpose. They stop too soon. They allow pain to dictate their obedience. They let hardship convince them that God is no longer with them. But those who understand the power of endurance do not allow pain to define them. They allow it to refine them. Jesus endured the cross because he saw beyond it. The suffering was temporary, but the glory was eternal. The pain was real, but the victory was greater. And that same principle applies to you. What you are facing now is not forever. The struggle is shaping you. The fire is refining you. The battle is preparing you. And if you do not give up, you will step into something far greater than what you can imagine. The chosen are not defined by how many times they fall. They are defined by how many times they rise. They are not broken by pain. They are strengthened by it. They do not surrender to suffering, they endure through it, because they know that endurance is not just about making it through, it is about becoming everything God has called them to be, transforming pain into purpose. Pain without purpose feels unbearable. It drains strength, clouds vision, and makes even the strongest question everything. But for those who are chosen, pain is never meaningless. It is not a dead end. It is a doorway. God does not allow suffering to be wasted. What was meant to break you is often the very thing that shapes you into who you were always meant to be. Jesus never experienced unnecessary suffering. Every moment of pain he endured carried a purpose greater than the moment itself. The betrayal, the rejection, the wounds, and the cross were not random acts of cruelty. They were essential steps in the process of redemption. Without the suffering, there would be no resurrection. Without the cross, there would be no salvation. The pain was the price, but the purpose was eternal. This is the reality for every person called by God. The trials, the losses, the betrayals, none of them are accidents. They are pieces of a bigger picture, one that cannot always be seen in the moment but will make perfect sense in hindsight. Pain has the power to either destroy or transform. The difference is in how it is handled. Those who are chosen understand that pain is not the end of the story. It is the process that prepares them for something greater. Joseph understood this. He was thrown into a pit, sold into slavery, falsely accused, and imprisoned. Years of suffering with no clear reason, no visible hope, no explanation. But when he finally stood as second in command over Egypt, the reason became clear. He was not simply enduring for himself. He was being positioned to save a nation. If Joseph had not gone through the pit, he never would have reached the palace. If he had not endured the suffering, he never would have stepped into his purpose. What his brothers meant for evil, God used for good. Paul lived this truth. Beaten, shipwrecked, stoned, and imprisoned, yet every hardship expanded his mission. Every time the enemy tried to silence him, his message only grew louder. The letters he wrote from a prison cell are still transforming lives centuries later. His pain became the platform that carried the gospel across the world. This is what the chosen must understand. The pain you are experiencing now is not just about you. It is not the final destination. It is preparing you, stretching you, refining you, and positioning you for something far greater than what you can currently see. What feels like destruction is often divine preparation. Many people never reach their purpose because they let pain turn them bitter instead of allowing it to build them. They allow wounds to become excuses rather than stepping stones. They focus so much on what they lost that they miss what God is developing within them. Pain has the power to create depth, wisdom, and resilience, but only for those who refuse to let it define them. The enemy wants you to believe that your suffering is pointless, that what you have lost cannot be redeemed, that your scars disqualify you. But that is the greatest lie. The very things you think disqualify you are often the things God will use to equip you. The experiences that hurt the most are the ones that create the deepest impact when surrendered to Him. The greatest testimonies do not come from perfect lives. They come from those who walked through fire and refused to let the flames consume them. They come from those who endured suffering and still chose faith. They come from those who were wounded but still kept moving forward. Jesus did not rise from the grave without scars. He could have. He could have erased every mark of suffering, every wound, every reminder of what He endured, but He kept them. When He appeared to His disciples, it was His scars that proved who He was. His pain became His testimony. Your scars are not your shame. They are your evidence. They prove that what was meant to destroy you did not succeed. They are reminders that you endured, that you survived, and that you are still standing. The things you thought would break you are actually the things that qualify you to walk in the purpose God has for you. What you are going through is not the end. It is the beginning of something greater. Your pain is the seed of your purpose. Your suffering is the foundation of your testimony. If you refuse to let it define you in defeat, it will define you in victory. The secret to overcoming fear and doubt. Fear is the greatest weapon the enemy uses to stop the chosen from stepping into their destiny. It paralyzes, distorts reality, and convinces people to shrink back when they are meant to move forward. Doubt whispers lies that make even the strongest question what God has spoken. If the enemy can make you afraid, if he can make you doubt, he can make you hesitate long enough to miss what God is calling you to do. The chosen are not exempt from fear and doubt. Even the greatest men and women of faith faced moments when uncertainty tried to shake them, but the difference is in how they responded. The chosen do not allow fear to dictate their decisions. They do not allow doubt to silence what God has already confirmed. They move forward, even when the road is unclear. Moses stood before the burning bush and doubted himself. He questioned whether he was capable, whether he was qualified, whether he could truly do what God was asking. He let fear speak louder than faith, but God did not remove the assignment just because Moses was afraid. He reminded him that fear was not an excuse to disobey. Moses had a choice, to trust God or to be ruled by his insecurities. The chosen always have this choice. Fear does not disqualify you. Giving in to it does. Peter walked on water because he had faith, but the moment he let fear take control, he began to sink. The wind and the waves were always there, but as long as his focus was on Jesus, they had no power over him. It was only when he shifted his focus to the storm that doubt overtook him. This is how fear works. It takes your eyes off of God and magnifies the problem. It makes the difficulty seem bigger than the promise. It convinces you that the storm is more powerful than the one who called you to step out in the first place. Fear always tries to make you forget what God has already done. It makes you doubt the miracles you have already witnessed, the prayers he has already answered, the faithfulness he has already proven. The Israelites saw God split the Red Sea, yet in the wilderness they doubted whether he could provide food. Elijah called fire down from heaven, yet days later he ran in fear for his life. Fear does not always come because of a lack of evidence. It comes because the enemy knows if he can make you forget what God has done, he can make you question what God is doing. The greatest enemy of fear is remembrance. When you remember who God is, what he has done, and what he has promised, fear loses its grip. This is why the chosen build altars, why they recall past victories, why they declare God's faithfulness even when they do not feel it. Faith is not an emotion, it is a choice. It is deciding to trust even when fear is screaming at you to retreat. Doubt will always present itself as a logical voice. It will tell you to be cautious, to wait for more confirmation, to delay until things make sense. But faith is rarely logical. Faith moves when God speaks, even when nothing else seems to align. Abraham left his home without knowing where he was going. Noah built an ark before there was any sign of rain. Joshua marched around Jericho when it seemed like nothing was happening. The chosen do not wait for circumstances to be perfect before they believe. They trust because God has spoken, and that is enough. The enemy wants fear to stop you before you even start. He wants doubt to keep you questioning long enough that you never take action. But the chosen understand that fear is a liar. It is a tool used to keep them from stepping into what God has already prepared for them. They refuse to let fear dictate their destiny. Fear will come, but it does not have to control you. Doubt will whisper, but it does not have to define you. The chosen move forward, even when they are afraid. They step out, even when they do not have all the answers. They trust, even when nothing makes sense. And because they do, they see the fulfillment of promises that others miss. You do not need to wait until fear disappears before you obey God. Fear only loses its power when you step forward in faith despite it. Doubt only fades when you refuse to let it silence the truth. If you are chosen, then you are called to live beyond fear, to trust beyond doubt, and to move forward even when everything inside of you wants to turn back. Walking by faith, not by feelings. Feelings are unreliable. They shift with circumstances, rise and fall with emotions, and often contradict the truth. Many people live controlled by their feelings. If they feel strong, they move forward. If they feel weak, they stop. If they feel God is near, they trust Him. If they feel distant, they doubt. But the chosen do not live by feelings. They live by faith. Faith is not an emotion. It is not based on what is seen, heard, or felt in the moment. It is rooted in something deeper, something unshakable. The chosen do not wait until they feel ready before they step into their calling. They do not wait until they feel strong before they obey. They move because they trust the one who called them, not because they feel capable. Abraham did not feel ready when God told him to leave everything behind and walk into the unknown. Moses did not feel qualified when he was called to confront Pharaoh. Gideon did not feel brave when God called him a mighty warrior. If they had waited for their feelings to align with their faith, they never would have moved. But they did not rely on emotions. They relied on the voice of God. This is the difference between those who fulfill their calling and those who do not. Many people know what God has asked them to do, but they delay because their feelings tell them it is not the right time. They wait for fear to disappear, for confidence to increase, for circumstances to become easier, but faith does not work that way. The chosen move forward, even when their feelings tell them otherwise. Jesus never let his emotions dictate his obedience. In the Garden of Gethsemane, he felt sorrow to the point of death. He felt the weight of what was coming, but he did not allow those feelings to stop him. He prayed, surrendered to the Father's will, and endured the cross, not because he felt like it, but because he knew it was necessary. The enemy knows how to manipulate feelings. He will use exhaustion, discouragement, and doubt to make the chosen hesitate. He will use isolation to make them feel forgotten, silence to make them feel abandoned, and delay to make them feel as if God is not moving. But feelings are temporary. They are not the foundation of truth. Peter walked on water as long as his faith was greater than his fear. But the moment he allowed his feelings to take over, the moment he focused on the storm instead of the Savior, he began to sink. This is what happens when emotions take control. They cloud vision, distort reality, and make the problem seem bigger than the promise. Faith is a choice, not a reaction. It is deciding to trust God even when nothing in the natural makes sense. It is standing firm on His promises, even when emotions try to convince you otherwise. It is moving forward, even when everything inside you wants to turn back. Many people never see the fullness of what God has for them because they allow their feelings to dictate their obedience. They let fear stop them. They let discouragement paralyze them. They let doubt delay them. But the chosen walk differently. They are not ruled by their emotions. They are ruled by the truth. The enemy will always try to make you live by feelings because he knows they are unstable. But faith is not moved by circumstances. It is anchored in who God is, not in what you feel in the moment. If you want to walk in everything God has for you, you must decide now. Will you follow your feelings or will you follow faith? God's silence is not His absence. One of the hardest seasons for the chosen is when God seems silent, when prayers feel unanswered, when direction is unclear, and when heaven appears distant. In these moments, doubt creeps in, questions arise, and the enemy whispers lies. God has forgotten you. He is ignoring you. He is no longer with you. But the truth is, God's silence is not His absence. The chosen must understand that silence is often part of God's process. Just because He is not speaking in the way you expect does not mean He is not working. Some of the greatest moments of growth happen in the silence. Some of the deepest revelations come in the quiet seasons when everything feels still. Look at the life of Jesus. Before his public ministry began, there were 30 years of preparation, 30 years of silence, 30 years where nothing extraordinary seemed to happen. But in that silence, God was working. He was preparing, shaping, and setting the stage for something greater. The same was true for Joseph. He had dreams of greatness, but before they were fulfilled, he endured years of silence in slavery and prison. It seemed as though God had forgotten him, but in reality, God was positioning him. Every silent season was leading him closer to his destiny. The Israelites endured 400 years of divine silence between the last prophet of the Old Testament and the arrival of Jesus. No new revelations, no prophetic words, no visible movement of God. But during that time, God was preparing the world for the greatest act of redemption in history. The silence was not a sign of abandonment, it was a sign of divine preparation. This is the truth the enemy does not want you to see. He wants you to interpret God's silence as rejection. He wants you to believe that God is distant, uninterested, or no longer involved in your life. But silence does not mean God has left. It means he is working in ways you cannot yet see. Sometimes God is silent because he is testing your faith. Will you trust him even when you do not hear him? Will you remain faithful even when you do not feel him? Will you keep moving forward even when you do not see the next step? Faith is not proven in the moments when everything is clear. It is proven in the moments when everything feels uncertain. Other times, God is silent because he is waiting for the right moment. Just because he has not answered yet does not mean he will not answer. Some breakthroughs require patience. Some promises take time. The waiting season is not a wasted season. When Jesus stood before Pilate, he was silent. He did not defend himself. He did not argue. He did not fight. His silence was not weakness. It was strength. It was the fulfillment of prophecy. And in the same way, when God is silent in your life, it is not because he is powerless. It is because he is working according to a divine plan that is greater than you can see. The chosen do not panic in the silence. They do not allow doubt to take root. They do not walk away just because God is not speaking in the way they expect. They understand that silence is part of the process. They trust even when they do not hear. They remain faithful even when answers do not come immediately. If you are in a season where God seems silent, do not give up. Do not let the enemy convince you that silence means abandonment. Keep seeking, keep praying, keep trusting. Because when the silence breaks, you will see that God was never absent. He was always there, working, preparing, and setting things in motion for something greater than you could have imagined. The role of community in difficult times. No one was meant to walk this journey alone. The chosen are not called to isolation, but to community. In moments of difficulty, the enemy's strategy is to separate, to convince you that no one understands, to make you believe that you are better off handling things by yourself. But isolation is dangerous, and those who try to endure without godly relationships often fall under the weight of their struggles. Even Jesus surrounded himself with people. Though he was fully God, he did not walk alone. He chose disciples, built relationships, and invested in those around him. In his most difficult moments, he sought the presence of others. Before the cross, in the Garden of Gethsemane, he did not go alone. He brought Peter, James, and John with him, asking them to stay awake and pray. If Jesus valued community in his time of suffering, how much more do we need it? The enemy understands the power of unity. This is why his first attack is always to divide, to bring offense, to create misunderstanding, to make you feel like no one truly cares. When you feel alone, you are vulnerable. When you isolate yourself, you become an easy target. But when you stand with others, when you have people around you who encourage, support, and pray for you, you become stronger. Moses did not lead Israel alone. When the battle raged and he grew tired, it was Aaron and Hur who held up his arms. Without them, he would have failed. David did not defeat his enemies alone. He had mighty men, warriors who stood with him, fought beside him, and protected him. Paul was not alone in his mission. He traveled with Barnabas, Silas, Timothy, and many others who strengthened him. God places people in your life for a reason. The right people will remind you of his promises when you feel weak. They will pray for you when you do not have the strength to pray for yourself. They will speak truth when doubt tries to take over. But you must be willing to embrace community, to open your heart, to allow others to walk with you in difficult seasons. Many people struggle because they refuse to let others in. Pride tells them they do not need help. Fear tells them that no one will understand. The enemy whispers that people will judge them if they reveal their struggles. But the truth is, the chosen were never meant to fight battles alone. The early church thrived because of unity. They met together, shared their burdens, supported one another, and grew in faith together. There is power in godly relationships, power in walking with people who push you closer to God rather than pulling you away. The chosen must surround themselves with the right voices, people who speak life, who encourage, who hold them accountable, and who remind them of who they are when they forget. The enemy wants you to believe that no one understands what you are going through. He wants you to believe that you are alone, but you are not. God has placed people in your life to walk with you, to strengthen you, to hold you up when you feel like falling. Do not push them away. In difficult times, do not isolate yourself. Seek the right people. Be vulnerable enough to ask for prayer. Be humble enough to receive support. There is strength in unity, power in godly relationships, and victory in walking together rather than alone. How worship shatters chains in the middle of pain. Worship is not just a response to victory, it is a weapon in the middle of battle. It is not just an expression of gratitude when things go well. It is a declaration of trust when everything is falling apart. The chosen understand that worship is not dependent on circumstances. It is not about how they feel. It is about who God is. And when they worship in the midst of pain, chains break, strongholds fall, and the atmosphere shifts. The enemy does not fear believers who complain, doubt, or hesitate, but he fears those who worship despite their pain, because worship is a declaration of war. It tells the enemy that no matter how fierce the battle, no matter how deep the suffering, no matter how long the trial, God is still worthy and faith is still unshaken. Paul and Silas understood this. Thrown into prison, beaten and chained, they had every reason to be discouraged. They could have focused on their suffering, questioned God, or surrendered to despair, but instead they worshipped. In the darkest hour, in the most painful moment, they lifted their voices in praise. And as they worshipped, the prison shook, the chains fell off, and the doors swung open. Their breakthrough did not come from complaining, it came from worship. This is the power of worship in the life of the chosen. It invites heaven into the situation. It shifts the focus from the problem to the one who is greater than the problem. It declares that pain does not define the future, that suffering does not have the final word, and that God is still on the throne. David understood this. He was a man of war, a mighty warrior, but his greatest weapon was not his sword, it was his worship. He praised God in the wilderness, in the caves, in the battles, and even after his greatest failures. He knew that worship was not just about music, it was about positioning his heart in surrender. The enemy will always try to steal worship. He will use discouragement to silence it, fear to suppress it, and distraction to weaken it, because he knows that when the chosen worship, heaven responds. He knows that when they lift their voices, strongholds are broken. This is why worship is one of the most powerful things a believer can do in times of suffering. Worship does not ignore pain. It does not deny struggle, but it refuses to let suffering have the final say. It acknowledges the hardship while declaring that God is still sovereign. It says, "Even here, in this moment of darkness, I will praise." That kind of faith terrifies the enemy because it proves that no matter what happens, he cannot shake your trust in God. The chosen do not wait for circumstances to improve before they worship. They worship in the prison, in the storm, in the fire, in the moments when nothing makes sense. And in doing so, they align themselves with heaven. They remind their spirit of who God is. They break the chains of despair, and they walk in victory, even before they see it with their eyes. Worship in pain is an act of defiance against the enemy's plans. It declares that God is still good, that hope is not lost, and that victory is already secured. It is not just an expression, it is a weapon. And when the chosen lift their voices in praise, no matter how broken they feel, heaven moves and chains shatter. What you focus on determines your strength. The direction of your life is shaped by what holds your attention. What you focus on has the power to either strengthen or weaken you, to either push you forward in faith or trap you in fear. The chosen understand that their focus is not just a small detail, it is the foundation of their endurance. The enemy's greatest tactic is distraction. He does not always need to destroy a person's faith outright. He only needs to shift their focus. He knows that if he can get them to fix their eyes on the problem instead of God's promises, on the pain instead of the purpose, on the battle instead of the victory, then he has already won. Peter learned this lesson on the water. When Jesus called him to step out of the boat, Peter had the faith to walk on water. As long as his eyes were fixed on Jesus, the storm had no power over him. The wind and waves did not change. What changed was Peter's focus. The moment he took his eyes off of Jesus and focused on the storm, he began to sink. The storm was always there, but it only had power over him when he gave it his attention. This is what happens in the lives of many believers. They start with faith, but then distractions come. Problems arise, delays shake their confidence, doubts creep in. Instead of keeping their eyes on God, they begin to magnify their struggles. Fear grows, discouragement sets in, and their strength begins to fade. Not because God has changed, but because their focus has shifted. David understood this principle. He faced giants, betrayals, and battles, yet his focus remained on God. He wrote in the Psalms, "I lift my eyes to the hills. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord." He chose to focus not on the size of the battle, but on the power of his God. The Israelites failed this test in the wilderness. When they left Egypt, they witnessed miracles, signs, and wonders. They saw the Red Sea part, manna fall from heaven, and water flow from a rock. But instead of focusing on the faithfulness of God, they focused on their problems. They saw giants in the promised land and forgot about the God who had already proven his power. Their lack of focus cost them 40 years in the desert. Paul, beaten, imprisoned, and persecuted, refused to focus on his suffering. He could have allowed discouragement to consume him, but instead he declared, "I press on toward the goal." His circumstances did not dictate his strength, his focus did. What you choose to magnify will determine how you walk through trials. If you magnify the problem, it will overwhelm you. If you magnify the one who is greater than the problem, you will walk in victory. The chosen do not deny the reality of struggles, but they refuse to let struggles define them. The enemy wants you to focus on what is missing, on what is not working, on what is still uncertain. But God calls you to fix your eyes on him. When your focus is right, your strength is unshakable. When your attention is on His promises instead of your problems, faith rises, fear disappears, and you move forward with confidence. Your strength is not found in perfect circumstances. It is found in a steady focus on God. The chosen do not waste time staring at obstacles. They set their eyes on the one who has already overcome them. And because of that, they walk in a strength that the enemy cannot break. The greater the calling, the greater the battles. Many desire to be used by God, to walk in purpose, to experience the fullness of their calling. But few understand the cost. The truth is, the weight of your battles is often a reflection of the weight of your calling. The greater the purpose, the greater the opposition. The enemy does not fight those who have nothing to offer. He fights those who are dangerous to his kingdom. The chosen do not go through ordinary struggles because they do not have an ordinary calling. They are called to shift atmospheres, to break generational strongholds, to advance the kingdom of God. And because of that, they face battles that others do not understand. Look at the lives of those God used in mighty ways. None of them walked an easy road. Joseph had a dream, but before he saw it fulfilled, he endured betrayal, slavery, and imprisonment. Moses was chosen to deliver a nation, but before he could lead, he spent 40 years in the wilderness. David was anointed as king, but before he ever sat on the throne, he was hunted like a criminal. Paul carried the gospel across nations, but with every step forward came persecution, beatings, shipwrecks, and imprisonment. And Jesus, the very Son of God, endured rejection, suffering, and the cross before stepping into resurrection power. The pattern is clear. Those who carry the greatest callings face the greatest battles. The enemy will not sit back and allow a chosen one to walk freely into their destiny. He will fight. He will attack with fear, with discouragement, with distractions, with betrayal, with spiritual warfare. His goal is not to wound, but to stop them entirely, because he knows that if they do not quit, they will become unstoppable. Many people misinterpret their battles. They assume that hardship means they are doing something wrong. They question whether they heard God correctly. They think the opposition is a sign to turn back. But for the chosen, the opposite is true. The battle is not proof of defeat. It is proof that they are moving in the right direction. If there were no resistance, it would mean they were not a threat. Jesus warned his followers that the road would not be easy. He said, "In this world you will have trouble. But take heart, I have overcome the world." The chosen do not ask, "Why am I going through this?" They understand that battles are a natural part of walking in purpose. Instead, they ask, "How can I keep pressing forward?" The chosen must be willing to endure. They must recognize that spiritual warfare is not a sign of failure, but a confirmation of their assignment. The pressure is greater because the calling is greater. The pain is deeper because the impact will be greater. The struggle is intense because the breakthrough is close. The enemy wants you to give up before you see the fulfillment of what God has promised. He wants you to believe that the battle is too much to bear. But what he does not want you to know is that if you endure, if you refuse to quit, if you keep pressing forward despite the hardship, you will step into something greater than you ever imagined. Every attack, every setback, every trial is not meant to break you. It is meant to build you. It is making you stronger. It is preparing you for what is ahead. God is allowing the pressure not to destroy you, but to refine you, to increase your capacity, to prepare you for the level of influence He has called you to carry. If the battle is intense, it is because the calling on your life is great. If the resistance is strong, it is because the impact of your obedience will be even stronger. Do not give in to fear. Do not let weariness cause you to retreat. The battle is not a sign to quit. It is a sign that you are stepping into something greater. The chosen do not turn back in battle. They press forward, knowing that the God who called them is the same God who will see them through. They understand that on the other side of the fight is a victory far greater than the struggle. And because of that, they refuse to quit. The reward of those who remain faithful. Every battle, every hardship, every trial endured by the chosen carries a purpose. Nothing is wasted in the hands of God. The suffering, the waiting, the moments of uncertainty, all of it is leading to something greater. The enemy wants you to believe that endurance is pointless, that faithfulness does not matter, that pressing forward is in vain. But the truth is, those who remain faithful will see the reward of their endurance. Jesus never promised that the journey would be easy, but he promised that it would be worth it. He said, "To the one who is victorious, I will give the right to sit with me on my throne." The chosen do not fight for temporary rewards. They fight for something eternal. They understand that everything they endure on earth is preparing them for something far greater than what they can see now. The enemy wants you to quit before you see the promise fulfilled. He wants you to believe that God has forgotten you, that your obedience does not matter, that faithfulness is pointless. But what he does not want you to realize is that every act of faithfulness is storing up a reward that far outweighs the struggle. The pain is temporary, but the glory is eternal. The suffering will pass, but the impact will remain. Look at the life of Jesus. He endured the cross, despising the shame, because he saw what was ahead. He saw the redemption of mankind, the victory over death, the restoration of what was lost. His suffering had a purpose, and his reward was greater than the pain. This is the pattern for the chosen. If they endure, if they remain faithful, if they refuse to give up, they will step into something far greater than they ever imagined. Joseph's years of suffering were rewarded when he stepped into leadership and saved nations. David's years of being hunted led him to the throne. Paul's suffering spread the gospel to the ends of the earth, and every believer who has walked in faithfulness has seen the hand of God move in ways they never expected. The greatest danger is stopping too soon. Many walk away when they are on the verge of breakthrough. Many surrender to weariness when victory is just ahead. But those who remain faithful, those who refuse to quit, those who keep trusting even when they do not see results, those are the ones who will see the fullness of what God has promised. The chosen are not defined by how many times they fall, but by how many times they rise. They do not quit when the journey gets hard. They do not walk away when answers take longer than expected. They keep believing, keep pressing forward, keep holding on to God's word, because they know that the reward is coming. God is not unjust. He does not overlook faithfulness. He does not forget obedience. He sees every sacrifice, every tear, every moment of trust in the face of adversity, and he promises that those who remain faithful will receive more than they ever lost. What seemed like a delay will be revealed as divine preparation. What felt like suffering will be transformed into testimony. The race is not given to the swift, but to those who endure. The battle is not won by those who are the strongest, but by those who refuse to quit. The chosen understand this. They do not live for the temporary, they live for eternity. They know that their suffering is achieving something far greater than they can see now. And because of that, they remain faithful to the very end. Your faithfulness is not in vain. Your endurance is not pointless. What God has prepared for you is greater than the pain, greater than the struggle, greater than anything the enemy tried to use against you. If you hold on, if you refuse to be moved, if you keep trusting even when it is difficult, you will see the reward of those who remain faithful. And in that moment, you will know it was all worth it.